How to build diversity in the architecture industry. Hi, my name is Marcin Wojciech-Żebrowski, and this is the newest episode of Urbcast, my podcast about urbanism, architecture, cities, and many more. Today, we will try to answer the very difficult question, which is about building diversity within the architecture sector in Denmark and beyond. Building Diversity is a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the field of architecture. It aims to challenge existing frameworks, advocate for equality, and build a common ground for individuals regardless of their gender, religion, disability, age, or other factors. This organization consists of architects and passionate individuals who work towards creating a more inclusive community through activism, dialogue, and exchange of knowledge. And today, two of my guests are the representatives of Building Diversity, and this is Ida Sofia Bergström, who is an architect and design thinker, as well as Nataly Timotheou, who is architect and interdisciplinary designer. We will talk about the story behind the Building Diversity as a group, and also how can we approach the problems and challenges like sexism in architecture, and also we will talk about the publication about who is the architect that the Building Diversity group is finishing right now once we speak. Welcome to the newest episode with Ida and Nataly. So I just wanted to say, Nataly and Ida, welcome to Urbcast. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having us.
It's very nice to meet you and discuss the Building Diversity. And this is something that, of course, we will discuss today. But before that, I would just love to ask you for a short introduction to the listeners. You are both based in Copenhagen, but this podcast is listened to in over 70 countries. So I think that it would be pretty nice that you just say something about yourself.
My name is Ida Bergström, and as you say, I live here in Copenhagen. I'm originally from Sweden, but moved here in 2006 and been here ever since. I am a trained architect, I usually say that, from the School of Architecture here in Copenhagen. But I have been working as a landscape architect since the day I graduated. At the moment, in my, 8 to 4 profession, I'm a manager or a leader for a small unit in upland landscapes architecture called Updrift, where we work with regenerative landscape architecture. And I've been part of Building Diversity. We talked about how we put the emphasis on since the start. However, I've actually been on kind of like a maternity leave. And also, as we discussed earlier, just before we started here, trying to adjust to the life, having 2 kids, having a very demanding work life as well. And also having these passions about trying to make our business more diverse. So now I'm finally getting more back into it. So very happy to be here. Super nice.
And hi, I'm Nataly Timotheou, and I come from Cyprus. I have studied interior design and architecture, including my master's in biomimicry of architecture. And I have previously lived and studied in Italy, the UK, and Sweden as well. But Copenhagen was always something that I loved, like a place that I felt home, and I've been here since 2016. I joined Building Diversity in 2022, so just a year ago. And I've been very much involved with the publication that we're going to discuss, and just an activist rhythm of making a change for wherever there is an issue.
So you both moved to Copenhagen with some dreams, with some expectations, I believe, but you mentioned the issues. So maybe let's start with those. Let's start with the challenges. What's wrong with the industry? Because this is something that you are advocating, that there are some spaces, there is some room for improvement. But let's start with the issues.
I think that when we refer to issues are always points where we can see that things are not working smoothly, right? So that is part of the life, and that is part of any business, sincerely. And I think that we are continuing some sort of work that didn't start with our group. It started a long time ago, and there's always room of improvement, and the issues are plenty, but I don't want to pinpoint and say, oh, we found the core of the issue and we have the magic spell and we're going to solve everything. It's more, as you said, that we're trying to make space to talk about it openly so we can collectively work towards a solution. And it's not a solution that, again, fixes everything. It's more of a work in progress and understanding, accepting that we're humans and it's a society that it's an organism and we work together.
Yeah, and I think what you say is like we try to be, because it's really hard. I mean, like what initiated it from the start, I mean, like this has grown a bit out of what was called sexism in architecture, where there actually was a very specific issue. We wanted to enlighten and put light on what actually, how the business actually was perceived by some, because not everybody, and we understand it, but some people had been discriminated. Some people had been, experiencing sexism in their workplaces. But we as a group, we always talked about like we wanted to do more, and we wanted it to move away from the duality of men and women, feminine versus masculine, but, take the broader picture. And I think also the publication, the idea of that came, but that is also what has been good with it. And I think also what has been for some people, I think some people wanted to bring their personal story, but this is actually about us stepping very much back and letting so many other voices come out there. And I think when you talk about the positive things, you can also see some other things, and then you start like, okay, but is that really? No, maybe not. But you can't just sit and say like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But of course, as you say, like, and we are in an industry that has a very solid system of hierarchy, I would say.
Even in Denmark?
Yes, even in Denmark. And actually quite a lot in Denmark. It is very much like, I don't know where it comes from, but I actually reflected on it the way over here. Like, it's interesting how we have all these movements, but still in organizations, we still have a prime partner and associated partners. So we have these hierarchies of power. And using the words of Eileen Reisler, like, but could we move from that maybe to more hierarchies of doing or hierarchies of being active instead, like not saying like, I decide what you should do, but saying, hi, I have the mandate or the power to make something positive happen. It is a difference, I think, like how you use the power. But having these organizations, I think that is one thing I've been reflecting about. Like, is that maybe a very big barrier to reach some of the interesting things that are presented in the publication perspectives?
I would like to develop this thread of the conditions of work, also sexism in architecture, especially here on the Danish ground, because I feel like you might have an impression from outside of Denmark that it is a very just country, very even country if it comes to all the rights people have and how outspoken they can be, and also the diversity if it comes to men and women in the workplace. But still, you just pinpoint some elements that are not working very well. Did you manage to identify why is it like this?
Well, it's a very specific question, the why. I mean, I think it's primarily on how, and it's how people behave and associate with each other. And I think it's a broad social issue in that sense. It's an infrastructure that is still, again, in progress. And we tend to believe that a culture makes people, but it's the people that make the culture. And that's also why we come together as people and say, okay, we can feel that in this culture, whether it's even Denmark or any other country, because we are an international group and even the publication has international voices. So we did have the opportunity to publish in Denmark and work here, but at the end of the day, it is an international issue. Even here on the table, we're 3 different nationalities in a foreign country. And I think that's the beauty of the diversity and why we talk about it as in how much we have in common through our differences and how much our differences actually contribute to improve each other. So when we talk about sexism and when we talk about inequality or abuse of power or misuse of power, We're talking about the fact that it's not pinpoint geographically only. It's a mindset and it's a culture and it's a behavior and social issue. And of course, all industries have a common ground, again, of these issues. But we have the experience of architecture. That's why we talk about architecture and our business and our field. And in a more holistic way, not only how much the industry is ill from this perspective on still having the need to progress in a progressive country like Denmark that is perceived from the outside, but also the fact that product itself and the education itself, the whole circle of the industry is suffering. Yeah, I think that's something that we're very much focused on, our well-being as architects and practitioners, but also what is it that we give back to the society.
So was that the main reason that you came together to form Building Diversity? Could you say something more about the motivations behind it and the story behind it as well? How did you kind of collectively decided that that's the things that you want to fight for, because you realize that the industry is ill in a way?
I think, as I said earlier, like building diversity in some of its parts, because now I'm also looking from my perspective where I'm sitting now, I can see that it has grown into something that I don't think we imagined when we started it. But it grew out of what was called Sexism in architecture, which was a group where I was also part of it. And I think we were about 6 people. And what happened was that there was this Me Too came to Denmark, whoa, a few years later than in the rest of the world. And we started talking about like, okay, but shouldn't we, like, we know the industry and we felt it on our own bodies, like how things actually can be out there. Should we try to, help people, share their stories and also, to enlighten how, like, that this actually exists also in our business. So there was a big, gathering all these stories and also having it was super sensitive material. So it was very like a process also, and also being in contact with media and finally releasing these stories and also starting to use our Instagram as one of the main primary channels for this. So that started going, but we talked about, we were very much like, for us, even though the group was primarily women, a lot of us was, and I think this is important, like, how do you get more knowledge and, how do you know that there's something out there? And, we had time to read books and we started to go like, okay, but it is something more here. We need to talk about intersectionality. We need to talk about care. We need to talk about, so many things connected, and especially diversity, because I think some people thought it was, this sexist thing, like there was men and women, but we saw it as a much bigger one. And I think also because the group already there starting to be diverse in a sense where people were from in the world internationally, we could also point on things like racism and also ageism and many of those things being like kind of like barriers or issues. But we talked about like, if we want to make a change and we want to make a change, and it's also being an activist, it's really hard to be activist and walk around and being mad all the time. The energy just goes out of you. And that wasn't why we were here. We were here because we could see, we had this vision of another world, of another architectural industry where all the creativity that is actually, the industry is loaded with creativity, and how this could be released. And I think what also made us like continue was like, because the publication, as we're talking about, has been following the work all the time. And it actually gave us a reason to stay together, you could say, like to continue and also start a new discussion. And I think when we were approached by Arkitektens Forlag,
which is?
It is the main, I would say, publisher in Denmark in regards of architectural material. They make so many, publications and books, primarily by men, about men. And I think they saw that, okay, here's a group of primarily women. Shouldn't we maybe help them to I think they thought maybe we would come and share our story. And we said like, okay, but we want to use this as a platform for all the other stories. And, it started growing from there. And then I think suddenly we were also more visual. I think actually, I'm talking to Nataly now, if she actually started before actually really saying like, we are building diversity, because it was in that process, it felt like we went from 6 and suddenly now we're, 18 or something. Like, people just started coming into the group. So we grew like woof. It was amazing.
Also, I wanted to add to what you said that we're 18 people, but 18 people that have been coming in and out. And it's organically, you asked how it formed. And like Ida said, no one expected. Like I joined a year ago and the world changed completely. And I wasn't part of the group before. It was Building Diversity. I joined while already having the publication planned. And it's true that it was a project that kept us together and kept us going, and more things were coming up. But I wanted to add primarily on the fact that it started as Sexism in Architecture from 6 people, women, that wanted to share that experience. And as Ida says, it's exhausting walking around being mad. So it went from activism to proactivism. So to be proactive about, in a beautiful and enjoyable way, that we want to make the difference that we want to see, but we act upon it. Like we want to stop being mad and stop being angry about issues that are happening and sit down and be like, okay, let's hear each other. If I have a problem as a woman in architecture, that I might have faced sexism, it is not excluding the fact that maybe a man has had a problem with being treated in a sexist way. And that's where the Building Diversity unfolded, in the fact that we wanted inclusivity. We wanted to say that if we have problems, it doesn't exclude other people's problems, other people's issues that we cannot see, because the same way that others might not see our experience, we cannot see other people's experiences. And that's the making space and inviting people to bring their voice in the publication, instead of saying, oh, I as a person have had this experience. Ida as a person has had this experience. And then we're sitting together sort of complaining about it. It's more of saying, this is a fact, and with this fact, we want to do something.
Yes, and I also think another thing I reflected upon, we had a meeting just a few evenings ago, and how the organization Building Diversity also has, as you say, like it has grown organically, but we have actually created that space and that culture and structure within our organization that we might have, some of us, prior to this, have been missing maybe in our workplaces. So we have actually created something, where these values and this culture actually brings things to life. That, what we imagined, like we had this idea that this could happen. We have heard of other people who did it. And now we can see it actually. I think also you said something, because we had a talk also before this, since, as I said, I've been away for a while now. I felt so bad for it. And then Nataly said but you were a seed to something else that, Building Diversity and myself and other people, we could grow in that and grow out of it. And then I was also it is so important also to understand for ourselves to let go sometimes and give the room and space to other people, because that is actually when serendipity, which is one of the most beautiful things, can happen, and when things actually can grow. Because the more we try to hold it, the less it gets. And I think that is also, again, back to trying to inspire the industry. What happens if you give the room to someone else? What stories can come out of it? What architecture emerges?
It seems that you really live what you say. You seem really excited while discussing that, and you're gesticulating as well and showing that this is important to you. And I think that it is important to talk about it. That's why I'm also happy that you are here and that we have a chance to have this discussion about building a diversity and giving room to others. And also, as you said, empowering people, because that's how I understand your idea, your aim, your agenda. And I think that this is a good moment to discuss the publication, the book, because this is also something that gives the open platform to people. There was an open call, so everyone could join and contribute with their thoughts. And there are different pieces about defining the role of architecture, but not only. How this process of creating this common statement, this common manifesto looked like?
Well, it's being printed as we speak, like literally. And I think by the time that the podcast will go publicly, we'll be able to also share the book itself. I think that Ida might be able to introduce how the whole idea of bringing the book together started, because as she mentioned, Ida has been part of the process much earlier on, and because it's a group from 2020. And I joined when the project of the publication itself started. So we have the bits and pieces that complete each other's story on where we are today.
Yeah, I can try. And just to make clear, like when you say the manifesto, do you mean like the title of the book or more like...
I rather mean the main message, because you gather message under one umbrella of building diversity, giving people voices. So I use it as a word of this kind of collective.
But I think one important thing for me is, or for us to say, I think what was a key thing in it, and the discussions started, I think it started already back when gathering these stories about sexism. It was actually one of the main questions. And I think it's so good to see that the publication is still called Who is the Architect? Our idea from the beginning was actually to make, and you can correct me if things are happening differently, but to make different types of publications with a different focus. But we wanted to start with who is the architect, and we wanted people to contribute. So instead of saying, again, talking about the negative, like this is always the architect and we feel we are trapped, blah, 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 open up for stories like who is the architect and what, like in every sense. So it came, as I said, like we were contacted by Arkitektens Forlag about they wanted to help us with this publication. So we went into dialogue with them and ourselves about what we wanted to do. And it was very clear early on that we wanted to share stories in some kind of way. And I think, we wanted to, again, move focus away from the sexism and over to diversity. And then there was this, hardcore super work trying to get, funding for the book. Almost everything we do it on our free time. So there's so much heart and, power in this publication now because, it has been done. Yeah, that was also the way it started. But I think some of us could also see that we needed funding because we couldn't fund it ourselves. And Arkitektens Forlag, they wanted to help us with some of, applying for funding. So that was a big process, starting that. And then we started on making the open call, as you said. It was important for us that it was open. And we tried to, and it's really hard because, you want to make it as open as possible, but still knowing that there will be people who don't. And that was also a reason why we chose English from the beginning as well. As we've also talked about, the group was also diverse in that sense already. We had moved away from speaking only Danish in our meetings over to English because there were people who were not native in Danish coming into the group. That was like, okay, it needs to be in English in order for us to gather stories, not just to gather internationally, but to also get some more voices from Denmark. Because as we know, the architectural industry does not just contain Danes. And actually, I think how far we got, because I'm trying also now, because we kind of shifted almost like when I went out a bit, because I gave birth to my second daughter, and then it's like everything. And it's also a good thing, to let things go, which is really hard for a FOMO person like me. But I did it. And I think that was actually because I think we had almost maybe started on getting we had gotten I can't actually remember quite. It's a blur because I was in a workshop where we looked at things. And I think that was after I had given birth, but just a few months.
Yeah.
So I think I was actually there when we sent the open call out. And then you kind of joined Nataly from where we started to get all the contributions.
Exactly.
A lot of them.
Yes. And the open call, I think, again, reflecting back to the word manifesto, the open call defined the content of the book. We set up the question. We set up the question that we have been discussing among us. But when we did the open call, people with their own voices and experiences defined what the chapters were, what the topics were. We didn't have an agenda of saying we need material responding to this specific agenda, which I'd like to circle back to the first question that we had in the podcast about what are the issues. So the people define what are the issues and how they perceive these experiences. And I think that itself, that is what we stand by. Like the idea that we don't get to define because we felt defined by others. We wanted to have a conversation, this open dialogue, which is our, I guess, biggest weapon in this situation, that we want the positive and the open dialogue. And therefore, with this open call, there were a lot of submissions. We had the editorial team put together and read through the material, edit, have been in contact with people all over the world. We had submissions from Argentina to China, from different nationalities. I think we have more than 17 nationalities in the book. And as Ida said, it's in English because we did want it to be accessible to everyone. And we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. Therefore, it's a non-profit organization. It's a non-profit initiative to make the book. And we tried really hard to make it accessible, even within the industry of publishing and making things happen, and having people that are fairly compensated about their work, because we chose to work as a volunteer group, but that doesn't mean that everyone is, it's part of their job. So with the book, we have 7 different chapters, and they start from the idea of collectivity, which is something that we also represent, of how we can come together. We talked about hierarchy before, how we can come together in a different type of collaboration that you shift roles and it fluctuates in terms of how life goes, instead of having this rigid system that everybody needs to stick with. And then be able to make room for others, but also take for yourself. Because taking care of each other is something very important for us, to be able to say, I am right now not able to contribute and I need to step down, or I want to pursue this idea, who wants to be with me, or I agree with this idea, let's talk about it together. So the first part of the book talks a lot about collectivity and other types of collective work. We have projects also that, for example, from Argentina and from Austria, about collectivity and how that translates into the urban landscape and how that translates into the product of architecture. And then we have contributions that talk about the politics of architecture and the status quo of an architect, touching matters upon identity of what is this rigid role of the architect that has been established and everybody seems to try so hard to achieve, instead of saying, okay, I as a person, I'm an architect in this way. And what is the architect within us instead of what is imposed? And then we have the last part, which is growing into that world that Ida talked about before, of like, we imagine worlds. We are also trained to not just build a wall, we are trained to imagine a complete world where there is life inside, there is space, there is time. We build today for tomorrow, and the tomorrow might be different. So we take what was from yesterday to adapt it to today, for example. So the last part discusses about futures and how people imagine those futures. And I think this is like an overview of the content that we ended up having in front of us. Like, again, it wasn't an agenda.
How do you imagine the future of building diversity or building diversity? I mean here, do you have any expectation if it comes to the reaction about the book? Because some might say that, also coming back to the hierarchy in the system or in the architectural system especially, as long as it's not gonna reach the top level people, the management, the people who are making the decisions, it will not change much. Are you more optimistic than that, thinking that it might actually change something in the industry?
I think that I will get back to something that I mentioned before, that culture doesn't make people, people make culture. And when we think in a hierarchical way and we expect the change to be done from above, then we, of course, behave in a hierarchical way. Therefore, I believe that it's something that we didn't specifically talk about within the group. So it's a little bit also my personal stand at this point, that it was a choice made back in the day that this is something that we do for ourselves. You pointed out that it's something that we do with our hearts. And we're already happy to change someone's life and not the whole system, not take down the world. And there are no expectations of saying that we will make the huge impact and change the industry and the world will see what we see. We want to do this for ourselves and do this for the person next to us and for whoever wants to start feeling that there is a possibility to cooperate and work together. So I think the expectations are very humane and very much to the heart of wanting to state the facts and take this slowly. And the ambition is to make a change because we care.
Yeah, and I think also on that, I remember reading once that revolution is very rarely something that happens, like we see revolution as, we have it all like in pink one day and then it's yellow the other. But revolution is something that actually is like, somebody said it's like islands in the sea. And one by one, the island changes. And then suddenly there's a tipping point, and that's when revolution happens. We just don't see it coming. And also my ambition with the book is not that this will, it will be there and will change the world like some other books might have done. But I think when those books came, they were islands that started something, publications. But I actually see a movement when I look out in the industry, especially talking about care and also talking about, humans and our needs in order to function and be happy, and also to be in the corporate world, I would say, be productive. We need to take care of ourselves first. And I can see that this is actually happened also on top levels where people are starting to talk about sustainable leadership, regenerative leadership, and also talking about, I think there's this author called Frederic Laloux who wrote a book also about like having organizations with, he calls it self-leadership, but there can also be like shared leadership so that, so I think there are some things happening that is kind of like not maybe, completely our circle, but, that we can relate to and we can see things. But I don't think, or it has never been my idea that this book will like change the world. But I think what you say is key, because the written word or anything that we as human beings create, that we want to express something through our ideas is, who does it reach? And is that person able to understand and read it? Because that I also think is like, we also know that now we say like it's English, it's for everybody, but English is not for everybody. It is also written in a, for some people maybe, difficult language to read. So that is also saying like, okay, is there things we can, how can this be communicated in other ways? And also who could we communicate it to and why? So I think that could be, how do you take this? Because when the book is, out, and it was also a discussion we had long, when the publication started, because we started to apply for a publication and then suddenly we got funding. And then we're like, oh no, but what if we want to make something else? What if we want to make a movie or an installation? Now, we can't use this money because it is supposed to be for the written word. Because I think it's interesting to also think about like, how do we visualize things? We're very, the word is a very good way, but there are also other ways, and words are different for people, what they read.
And I wanted to add on that because you asked about the future plans of building diversity and where this book will take us. I think that we should also mention that we are actively working with different types of events and different types of communication. So we are trying to be part of debates and talks and write articles, which again is a written word, I know, but in a very different consumption. We're here today. We try to reach out to network with other people, and we are involved in the UIA. We have a small exhibition happening. We're going to be part of a debate with CAFEX coming up this summer.
The first one is the World Architecture Festival coming to Copenhagen, and the second one is the Copenhagen Architecture Festival.
Yes, thank you for reminding me that it's a conversation that is beyond this room.
Exactly.
We try to keep our eyes open in whatever comes along. So that's why we don't have a fixed, rigid agenda, and just see and hear from people what is their needs. And I should mention that our group is also forming not only from architects at this point. We have sociologists, we have body activists, we have designers. We are growing into an interdisciplinary group that is talking about the built environment in more ways than architecture. And I think that is part of the growth, and there is no fixed plan, but I think that is to be honest and be true to what was the reason to come together, and is to build diversity and inclusion in the built environment and the industry.
To summarize, there are many thoughts. One of them was that the revolution doesn't happen overnight, and it's step by step, and one day there is this big change coming. The second thing you've mentioned about the written word, and not only, but the audience, the people that you can reach with your creation, whether it's a book or whether it's a podcast. And what I love about creating content and spreading the word is that you have no control over to whom it's going to eventually reach and whom you're going to inspire and what it will finally create. So that's something that is a really, really magical to me. And I feel that you also share the same impression. You are nodding now. And lastly, I wanted just to say that it is a big journey for you from growing from Sexism in Architecture group, being a small one and with kind of one single message, and growing to building diversity, to giving this big room, and as you just summarized, just empowering people. And to summarize that in an inspirational tone, I often ask about a book recommendation. I think that we know what's the book of the episode gonna be. So maybe you can just briefly mention where people can find it. But the second one is also connected to the book, but how can people who would like to be involved in your work, how can they reach out to you? How can they do it? Because you've said it's about a kind of collective work. It's about empowering each other and giving space. So I hope that there are some people being inspired after listening to this conversation. How can they be part of this change?
I'm very happy that you asked that, because as you were talking, you talked about how we reach people with our word. What hit me was that actually we really want to put the word there for people to reach back to us as well. Because I am one of the people that reached to the group because I saw a talk. I was present in a talk, and I thought I would like to be part of it. And then I reached out. Currently, we're trying to, as I said, we both said many times that this has been an organic evolution of the group. So we finally stopped and reflected and said, okay, we need to have some sort of identity that people can recognize us and they can find us and they can have a clear message of what is happening. Therefore, we worked with an agency, design agency, with a very similar mindset of what is not hierarchy and how we can collectively work together, called Public Service. And we're soon going to be launching our identity. And I hope that this will be very recognizable and very approachable for people to feel safe to reach out and say, we want to join, or we want to learn what you've done. Maybe we want to do it in our university, in our office, in our country. And we're always welcoming people reaching out. And we have our Instagram accounts, both Sexism in Architecture and Building Diversity. And we have a website that is also soon going to be updated with our new visual identity. And yes, I think we are also on LinkedIn. where if people feel like they would like to reach out, which is also has been a very active networking from professionals, as Ida mentioned before, not only from students or architects, but young architects, but also from higher up positions who are interested in making this change as well in the industry. So I think those are the main venues of communication.
Yes, and I would also say personally, people can also reach out on me personally on LinkedIn. Like, I understand that it can be a big thing to go and knock on an organizational door and feel like, because we are more than happy. I've been doing this activist thing for many years now. Before all this, I actually had a network or initiated a network in the Arkitektforeningen, also Danish here, but the Union of Architects in Denmark. Not union, but anyways, kind of a gathering. And it was magical when people came up to you, because that is also the thing, like we held events and people came and said like, this is amazing, I want to be part. And you go like, whoa, because it's like, now I'm a parent yourself. So for me, it's like, when you have a kid and somebody says like, I love your baby or your daughter, you go like, yes, so do I. It's nothing better than to share it, because that's when the energy comes in. It's amazing because, so people are just reach out. There is always room. And the thing is, I also would like to say, if you look at the organization and you think like, but there are some parts, I don't know if that's me. The organization is organic. It changes. It has changed in a year. It has gone from something it was to something new. It is a part of everything and everyone that is in it. And it is open to change. It wants to change. It wants to grow. It wants to become something. And we don't know what. We give it room. It's like with nature. We say like, okay, we gave it some nice soil. It's going to get some sun and rain. We'll see what happens. And yes, the publication we would like to recommend. No, but I want to say, I actually wrote another book down, because I think it's also key to remember we all stand on the shoulders of others.
And that the revolution doesn't happen overnight.
Exactly.
To emphasize.
So one of the ones and I'm always forgetting what it's called, but one of my favorites is Feminist Futures of Spatial Practice. It is a publication made kind of like, it has some, things related to ours, but it was much more connected to KTH in Stockholm, the architectural school there, where they had some courses on the subject of feminist futures and feminist architecture. But I think for me, that was a very nice opening into hearing more voices from the industry. And that was written, I think, almost 10 years ago. So that is also a recommendation for me. If you like our book, I think you should go also with this one.
Thank you.
Or our publication, the publication. It's not ours.
Well, it is ours.
Yeah, but
it is our initiative that made it happen. And I think that I wanted to just add that we often struggle with the idea that we are building diversity, as in we don't want to be a cold organization of we are building diversity and you don't know who's behind. But we also don't want to step forward and be like, I, as a person, I'm part of building diversity and I'm doing such a great work. But we want to keep it personal. So we sometimes struggle with this idea of how much do we expose ourselves as me, Nataly, you, Ida, or Christine, or Asal, or Bruno, or Nitzen, or anyone else in the group. But it would be nice to be able to have people reaching out to us, people as individuals. So you should also do that. And we would love to hear about thoughts about maybe this is a post-project that we can have on continuing the conversation of who is the architect and continue it. Maybe people, after reading it, want to talk more about it, and it could turn into an online, archive.
On purpose, I didn't ask you this question, who is the architect? Because I would love to leave the listeners with this question at the end of this episode and making them think about who is the architect. But also, it might be a potential idea for another discussion we can have, so you could share some thoughts you have around that. But for now, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming here to Urbcast and sharing this very interesting perspective. It was very nice to talk to you, to listen to you, and get inspired. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to the newest episode about building diversity with Ida and Nataly. And I hope that this episode influenced you and inspired to think about the problems connected with, for example, lack of diversity or sexism within architecture industry. If you would like to get to know something more about the topic, feel free to connect with Building Diversity Group or check their newest publication that is launching very, very soon. Thanks for listening and talk to you very soon.